Hello, could you help me grow this channel? Subscribing is totally free. Just one click below this video is all it takes.
I remember the chicken. It was dry, borderline rubbery, with a hint of freezer burn that no amount of gravy could fix. We were sitting around my parents' old dining table, the one with the chip on the corner that they always said they'd fix, but never did. Just like most things in that house. The overhead light hummed faintly, casting a weird yellow glow that made everything look colder than it felt. It was my 25th birthday, and instead of a celebration, it felt like a damn meeting that no one wanted to attend. There was no cake, no candles, no present. My mom had picked up a pie from the store, still in its plastic container, tossed on the table like it was a side dish, not a centerpiece. My dad was halfway through his beer, half listening to the radio. In the next room, pretending to care about the conversation at hand. And my sister, Emily, bless her heart, was scrolling through her phone with a glazed-over look like she'd rather be anywhere else. No one even sang. My mom had said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. "You know, Lauren," she said as she scooped potatoes onto her plate, "I think 25 is kind of the cutoff for gifts. Don't you agree? You're a grown woman now. Presents are for kids." It hit me mid-bite. I remember chewing slower, not sure if I heard her right. I waited for the laugh, the just kidding, the wink, or maybe some envelope she'd pull out as a surprise, but none of that came. She just kept eating, like what she said wasn't completely tone-deaf and emotionally tone-blind. I looked at my dad, hoping maybe he'd throw me a bone, but he didn't even look up. He just grunted something about times being tough and we're all cutting back. And I nodded, of course I did. That's what I'd been taught to do. Smile, be grateful, don't make a scene. I said something like, "Oh yeah, sure, I get it," and tried to laugh it off, even though the knot in my chest was tightening like a vice. Emily didn't say a word, not even a quick happy birthday. She was busy showing our mom some new filter she'd found on Instagram that made your skin look like glass. I drove home that night in silence, my phone lighting up with the occasional "hope you had a nice birthday" text from friends who assumed my family had made it special. I didn't have the energy to reply. I got home, kicked off my shoes, poured a glass of wine, and sat in the dark. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even sad. It was worse than that. I felt invisible, like I'd slipped through the cracks in my own family, and no one even noticed. It wasn't the lack of a gift that got to me. I could buy my own gifts. I'd been buying them for myself since I was 17. What stung was the message underneath it. "You don't matter enough for us to make the effort." That's what I heard. And the worst part? I had a sinking feeling it wasn't a mistake. It was the rule now. But here's the thing. I didn't throw a fit. I didn't storm out. I didn't even post some vague attention-seeking status online like most people might. No, I sat with it. I let it sit in my bones like cold rainwater in a cracked pipe. And I started remembering all the other times this had happened, but quieter, more subtle. The way Emily always got the last slice of cake. The time I graduated and they sent flowers to my dorm 3 days late. The Christmas I got socks while she unwrapped AirPods. That night, I went back onto Facebook, something I rarely did anymore, and saw my mom had shared a post titled, "Gift Ideas for Daughters Who Deserve It All." I swear to God, it had jewelry links, spa packages, personalized journals, and a caption that read, "Can't wait to spoil our girl in a few weeks." Our girl. She meant Emily, obviously, the baby, the favorite. I clicked on the post, and sure enough, she had a saved shopping cart on some boutique site filled with scented candles, bathrobes, and a reservation for a luxury spa downtown. I didn't even need to ask. I already knew they were planning something for Emily's birthday, something big. I didn't say anything, didn't comment, didn't even breathe hard. But something inside me shifted, something subtle, like the sound of a lock turning, just once. I stared at the screen and took a long sip of wine, feeling the bitter grape burn its way down. And in that moment, I wasn't hurt anymore. I was patient. Let them have their spa weekends and their bullshit brunches. Let them post about how much they adore their youngest. Let them forget I'm even in the family tree. Because when the time comes, I won't yell, I won't argue, I won't ask for what they clearly don't want to give, but I will remind them. And trust me, they're not going to like how I do it. It happened about 7 weeks after my birthday dinner, if you could even call it a dinner, though at this point I refer to it more accurately as the evening that confirmed what I'd quietly suspected for most of my adult life. That in my parents' eyes, I had somehow transitioned from daughter to functioning adult unit, someone who no longer required affection, recognition, or any form of meaningful emotional engagement, while my younger sister remained firmly planted in the golden light of their attention, like a permanent fixture in a staged family photo they'd never bother to update. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a lukewarm cup of coffee on a rainy Saturday morning, just scrolling through my phone out of habit, not looking for anything in particular, when my screen filled with one post after another, each one more polished and painfully curated than the last, and all of them featuring Emily. She was smiling in every photo like someone who knew she was adored, standing with a mimosa in one hand and a silk robe draped perfectly around her shoulders, flanked by a group of friends I recognized vaguely from high school and college, the kind of girls who laugh a little too loudly and only wear sunglasses with gold rims. The caption my mother had written was what really stopped me cold, a sugar-sweet collection of words wrapped in faux humility. Our beautiful baby girl turned 23. She works so hard and gives so much, we just had to spoil her a little. Surprise spa weekend with the best crew around. The photos kept coming. There was a flat lay of matching slippers and embroidered robes arranged like some Pinterest fever dream. There was a boomerang of Emily opening a bottle of champagne, while someone off-screen screamed, "Birthday Queen!" There was a video of them all clinking glasses, my mother included, with that smile she saves for when she knows she's being watched, the one where her eyes stay cold while her mouth does all the work. And then the final insult. A group photo of everyone in white bathrobes, standing in front of a luxury resort entrance, with a massive pink balloon arch above them. I stared at that photo for what felt like forever, the coffee in my mug going stone cold in my hand, the taste of bitterness already on my tongue long before I even thought about what it all meant. It wasn't just the celebration that hurt, although it certainly stung to see such a lavish display of affection so soon after being told I was too old for gifts. It was the giddy, public declaration of favoritism, the kind that left no room for plausible deniability. This wasn't a case of forgetting my birthday or claiming things were tight financially. No, this was intentional. This was prioritizing. This was choosing. And I sat there, phone in hand, silently absorbing every image like a punch to the gut that never quite landed but left a bruise anyway. My fingers hovered over the screen, tempted to send a message, maybe something dry and pointed like, "Guess gifts aren't too childish when it's Emily, huh?" Or maybe even a sarcastic thumbs up in the comment section just to let them know I saw it. But I didn't type anything. I didn't comment, didn't like, didn't share. I just let the photos sit there, taking up space in my mind like a slow leak in the roof, quiet, damaging, impossible to ignore once you notice it. Instead, I got up, walked to my closet, and pulled out an old storage bin from the back shelf, the one I hadn't touched in years, mostly because it held things that belonged to a younger version of myself, a version I had carefully shelved, labeled, and ignored in the name of growing up. Inside were the remnants of birthdays long past, faded cards with crooked handwriting, small trinkets that had once meant the world to me, and a journal I had nearly forgotten existed, filled with thoughts I barely recognized as my own. But nestled at the very bottom, wrapped in an old scarf, was a wooden box I had almost forgotten I kept. It was one of those memory boxes you make when you're a teenager and overly sentimental, filled with ticket stubs, broken jewelry, old keys to places that no longer exist. But this one had more than just nostalgia. It had evidence. Evidence of every time I had been quietly overlooked, every moment where I had been given less under the guise of fairness or adulthood, or some vague sense of practicality. Inside that box were photos of parties that didn't include me, gifts I bought for others with money I didn't really have, letters I never sent, and even a printed out copy of an email my mom once sent my aunt, casually describing me as independent to a fault. She just doesn't need much from us, you know? I had saved that email like a wound I wanted to keep pressing on, a reminder of how they saw me, not as someone to care for, but as someone who didn't require caring. I closed the box and placed it on the coffee table, my mind already moving in a direction I wasn't sure I'd go through with, but couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry or demand answers or make some grand dramatic exit from the family. That wasn't my style. But I was going to do something deliberate, something quiet, something they couldn't ignore or write off as me just being sensitive. I looked down at my phone again, now still, the battery nearly drained, the spa photos still sitting at the top of my feed like a spotlight on everything I had finally decided I was done tolerating. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't about gifts or cake, or even birthdays. It was about recognition, about being seen. And if they weren't willing to do it voluntarily, then I would make sure they saw me, one way or another. There's something dangerously powerful about silent resentment, the kind that doesn't scream or scratch or beg to be noticed, but simply grows roots somewhere deep inside your chest, expanding inch by inch like ivy in the walls of an old house, cracking things quietly until one day everything just gives way. That was the version of myself I had become. In the weeks following Emily's birthday parade, a version that wasn't angry in the traditional sense. No outbursts, no slammed doors, no passive-aggressive texts or dramatic family group chat statements, but a version that watched, cataloged, remembered. I began to treat my memories like evidence, as if my entire childhood had turned into a courtroom drama, and I was both prosecutor and defendant, presenting to myself the case I had always suspected was true, that I had never really been less loved, just less celebrated, less centered, less protected, and in a house like mine, that translated into an entire life of being quietly pushed to the sidelines under the guise of maturity. The realization didn't come with a bang. It came in fragments, little moments that floated to the surface whenever I let my mind wander in the car, while folding laundry, brushing my teeth, or scrolling through my camera roll, only to notice how few photos existed of my birthdays past, compared to the thousands they'd posted for Emily in just the past year alone. I began jotting things down, not for drama, not to stew in self-pity, but to keep track, to create some sort of map of all the things I had swallowed over the years because it was easier to be agreeable than aren't confrontational. I wasn't planning revenge at that point, not exactly, but I was preparing, quietly, like someone getting their story straight before an inevitable reckoning. The list started simple: dates, events, gifts. The year I turned 13 and asked for a sleepover party, but was told there wasn't enough money. 2 months later, Emily got a laser tag party with a cake shaped like a unicorn. The year I graduated high school with honors and bought my own laptop using saved babysitting money because my parents said we should save big gifts for college, only to see Emily unwrap a brand new MacBook for her 16th birthday with a ribbon the size of her head. The time I got strep throat during a family trip and stayed in the hotel alone while they all went ziplining, and no one brought me back a souvenir. It sounds petty when you say it out loud, but pain doesn't always come in loud cinematic heartbreak. Sometimes it comes in teaspoons, slowly filling a jar you didn't realize you were holding until it starts to overflow in your hands. And that was what my list became, a collection of teaspoons, each one a quiet reminder that I had learned not to expect too much because they had taught me, year after year, that asking for more only made me seem ungrateful. By the end of that week, I had gathered more than just a list. I had begun pulling physical pieces together, almost instinctively, like I knew I would need them even before the idea of the box fully formed in my mind. I found the birthday card for my 12th birthday, unsigned because my mom had forgotten to finish it. The love Mom and Dad left blank on the inside, still in perfect, painful silence. I found the tiny ceramic bracelet I'd made in art class at 15, the one Emily had dropped and broken, then laughed about, claiming it was ugly anyway. I even found an old voicemail saved from when I was in college, where my mom had called to tell me she wouldn't make it to my recital because Emily had a cheer competition. You know how these things are, sweetie. There'll be others. But there weren't. These weren't just items. They were evidence. They were stories I had kept to myself for years. Years because voicing them always made me sound bitter or jealous or overly sensitive. Labels they loved to apply whenever I showed even a hint of emotion that didn't align with their carefully curated narrative of a happy, balanced family. But now, collecting them didn't feel like bitterness. It felt like clarity. I laid everything out on my coffee table, each piece fitting into a larger puzzle I didn't even realize I had been solving since I was old enough to understand disappointment. And when I stood over that collection, something inside me finally clicked into place. Not rage, not revenge, but intention. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to try to convince them to see what they had always chosen not to. I was simply going to remind them, in the most precise and poetic way possible, of everything they had so confidently forgotten. So I found a box, not fancy, not flashy, just a clean, sturdy cardboard box with enough room to hold a few carefully selected memories. I wrapped each item in tissue paper like fragile heirlooms, labeled them in my neatest handwriting, and placed them inside with the kind of care you reserve for things you don't intend to explain. I wasn't doing this to shame them. I was doing it so that for once in their lives, they'd have to sit with it, with me, with what they'd made. I taped the box shut, added a simple pink bow, because of course, Emily loved pink, and wrote a sticky note to place on top. For when you said I never asked for anything, that was all. No name, no signature, no anger, just truth. And as I placed the box by my door, ready to be delivered on the morning of my sister's next birthday, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me, the kind that only comes when you know you're finally telling the truth, even if it's without words, because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is say nothing at all. There is a certain kind of silence that follows an action taken with unwavering certainty, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty or uncertain, but rather deliberate, heavy, and full of something just below the surface. Like the moment before a storm breaks, or just after a door has been slammed shut and no one has yet decided whether to open it again. That was the silence I carried with me on the morning of Emily's birthday, the morning I left the box on the porch of the house I had once called home, without so much as ringing the bell a second time or checking the windows to see if someone was watching. I walked up the path with the package tucked under my arm, like it was nothing more than a tray of cookies or some forgotten delivery, set it down beside the potted fern that had been dying since spring, and walked away without hesitation, without looking back, without pausing for even a second to second-guess what I was doing. Because in my mind and in my bones, I knew it was time. I didn't do it to be cruel, though I was fully aware that the impact might cut deeper than anything I had ever said out loud. I did it because some truths need to be shown, not told, and because there comes a point when silence ceases to be peaceful and instead becomes complicit, becomes the very thing that allows other people's comfortable delusions to go unchallenged. I had been silent for too long. I had accepted too many explanations that weren't really explanations at all, just flimsy excuses wrapped in family obligation and topped with the kind of empty reassurances people give themselves to avoid guilt. And so the box was never meant to be loud or angry or dramatic. It was meant to be a mirror I placed gently on their doorstep, with the quiet hope that for once they might actually look. I don't know exactly who found it first. My best guess is Emily, since she was the birthday girl and the center of attention and likely the first one up that day, wrapped in a silk robe with her hair already curled, ready to be fawned over and documented. I imagine her opening the door with the same wide-eyed entitlement she always carried during childhood, expecting balloons or some extravagant surprise, only to find a plain box with her name nowhere on it and a single sticky note perched on top. I imagine the confusion on her face as she read those 9 simple words. For when you said I never asked for anything. And the way her expression must have shifted, just slightly, as she called for our mother. And my mother, predictably, would have come quickly, sensing something unusual, sensing something not part of the plan, and in her mind, already beginning to scan for who might have sent it and what kind of disruption it might cause to her perfectly curated birthday morning agenda. I don't need a camera to see it clearly. I can hear her voice in my head even now, that clipped, cautious tone she always used when trying to mask her irritation with polite curiosity. Asking, "What is this?" With her brow furrowed, lifting the lid with fingers that hesitated just a beat too long. Inside the box, she would have found no instructions, no dramatic letters, no explosive declarations. Just items, carefully wrapped, deliberately placed, and painfully familiar. The burned CD labeled Lauren's 10th birthday, not played, still in its plastic jewel case, with a track list written in purple ink and a small heart drawn beside the song I had once begged them to use for my party dance. The party never happened, the CD was never played, but I had kept it, tucked away, waiting for a moment when maybe it could speak louder than I ever could. Next to it, a photo, one I had printed specifically for this moment, a blurry snapshot of a birthday cake from when I was 12, hastily bought at the grocery store with someone else's name iced across the top. Emma, it had said, our neighbor's granddaughter. My mom had forgotten to place the custom order, and instead of owning it or apologizing, she had shrugged and said it didn't matter because it all tasted the same. I had eaten a slice of someone else's cake on my birthday while my parents laughed it off, and somehow that moment had never left me. There was also the screenshot, perhaps the most damning of all, a printed capture of a text my mother had sent to my aunt 2 years ago during a family holiday, in which she had written, "Lauren's always been more mature. She doesn't need the fuss. Emily's the sensitive one. She needs to feel special." I had found that message by accident on my aunt's tablet while she stepped out of the room. I never said a word about it until now. And finally, at the very bottom of the box, nestled in soft tissue paper like a relic, was a journal entry from when I was 16, photocopied from one of my old notebooks. It read simply, "Sometimes I think I could disappear, and they wouldn't notice until Emily needed something I usually do. I think I'm only valuable if I'm useful." I left it unsigned, but I didn't need to attach a name. They'd know. I can't say what happened immediately after the box was opened. I didn't stick around to watch. But later that evening, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother as expected, short and sharp and entirely devoid of anything resembling reflection. What is this supposed to mean? Not a question born out of curiosity, but out of defensiveness, out of disbelief that I would dare disturb the carefully maintained image of a balanced and loving family unit. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had already said it, in the only language they seemed capable of hearing. Things, forgotten things, overlooked things, things that, when finally assembled and placed in a box with no explanation, spoke volumes they had spent years pretending not to hear. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. Not necessarily understood, not forgiven, not embraced, but seen. And that somehow was enough. For now. There's a peculiar stillness that follows the kind of emotional earthquake no one admits happened. A stillness where every familiar gesture and routine carries a new invisible weight, where the air feels different, thicker somehow, and even the smallest moments seem to echo with something left unsaid. That was the space I entered after I left the box on the porch, after the message was sent, without my voice, without confrontation, without any immediate fallout to satisfy the part of me that had, if I'm being brutally honest, expected some dramatic showdown, some emotional reckoning, some tearful apology, or at least a raised voice that would confirm I had finally, undeniably, pierced the illusion they'd been feeding themselves for decades. But none of that came, and in its place was something more complicated, Something that didn't roar, but instead lingered like the aftermath of smoke. Undeniable, uncomfortable, but quiet. The first few days passed without any real contact. Just the occasional buzz of my phone lighting up with texts that said everything and nothing all at once. My mother, never one to stay silent when she felt her image was under threat, sent message after message, each one dressed in concern, but laced with the defensive undertone of someone who had never learned the language of accountability. "What's going on with you?" she asked in one. "That box was really uncalled for," she said in another. But my personal favorite, the one I read over and over because of its raw, almost laughable blindness, was simply, "You could have just said something." The irony nearly knocked the breath out of me, because I had said something 1,000 times, in 1,000 ways. I said it every time I bit my tongue, every time I showed up for them even when they didn't ask how I was doing, every time I celebrated Emily while shrinking myself, every time I said it's okay when it wasn't. That box was the first time I chose a different sentence, one that didn't require their permission to matter. I didn't respond, not because I was being petty, but because I had no interest in helping them rewrite the narrative yet again. I wasn't going to hand them a script or explain my actions so they could filter it through their usual lens of Lauren just overreacts. I wanted them to sit with it. Let the silence fill the room like a fog they couldn't ignore. Let it seep into their conversations, their birthday toasts, their perfectly posed family selfies. Let them wonder. Thanksgiving came, and I didn't go. No big speech, no dramatic exit. Just a simple message the day before. "I won't be coming this year. Hope you all enjoy." No explanation. No door left open for negotiation. I could imagine the conversation around the table in my absence. The way my mom would lower her voice slightly and say something performative like, "I don't know what's gotten into her," while my dad nodded silently, avoiding eye contact. And Emily shrugged. Not because she didn't care, but because emotional subtlety was never something she'd had to develop. She'd never needed it. Then came Christmas, and with it, a surprise. A small box arrived at my apartment, hand-addressed in my mother's careful cursive, the kind she only used for holiday cards and invitations. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days before I opened it, not out of fear, but out of sheer disinterest. I wasn't expecting an olive branch. Inside was a single candle, a brand I used to like in college, one I hadn't used in years. There was no note, no card, just the candle, nestled in tissue paper, as if it were enough to smooth everything over without the mess of actual conversation. I lit it once, the scent filling the room with artificial lavender and something that smelled faintly like guilt, then snuffed it out, placed it back in the box, and slid it into the closet. And that was it. That was the new rhythm. No apology, no confrontation, just a reshuffling of behavior, quieter invitations, shorter phone calls, careful tiptoeing around topics that might cause tension, and an odd unspoken agreement to never mention the box again. It became a ghost in the room. I knew they remembered. I could see it in the way my mother's voice hesitated when she spoke about family events, in the way my father seemed a little smaller each time we spoke, his voice more cautious, like a man who finally understood he had failed at something but couldn't quite name what. As for Emily, she never brought it up. Not directly, but months later, I saw she had posted a photo of a new journal, captioned, "Trying to be more intentional this year, learning to see what I missed." I didn't like it, didn't comment, but I saw it. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to see me, not as the shadow in the background or the safety net or the dependable one, but as a whole person who had reached her limit and decided to stop performing for their comfort. I don't know what they think of me now. I don't know if they view me as selfish, vindictive, or just going through a phase. I don't ask, and they don't say. But the energy has changed, and that's enough for me to know the message landed, even if they won't admit it. There are moments now, quiet, small, insignificant to anyone else, when I feel a kind of peace I never used to have, like when I buy myself something beautiful without justification, or when I laugh too loudly at my own joke while dining alone, or when I see my birthday come and go and realize I no longer expect a call, and yet I'm not sad, because I stopped needing what they never learned to give. Some people think revenge is loud and fiery and leaves a crater in its wake. But the truth is, the most devastating revenge is the kind that leaves no visible damage at all. Just the weight of reflection, the discomfort of recognition, and the haunting presence of something unresolved. And maybe that's the point. Maybe they'll never truly understand what was in the box, not the physical things, but the truths behind them, the years behind them, the feelings they never asked about, or maybe they do understand. And it's just easier to pretend otherwise. I'll never know for sure. But I didn't send the box for closure. I sent it for clarity. And now that it's done, now that it's out of my hands and in their memory, I finally feel like I don't owe them the performance anymore. Because I'm not too old for gifts. I'm just too old for pretending it never hurt.